I'll just start by paying our collective respects and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet this afternoon, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and collectively pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to say thank you all for coming along today. We've got company directors, leaders in the disability sector, the owner of my favourite pub, people who've served on some of the most important community organisations in Western Australia, community members, one and all, thank you for being here. And a very special thank you to Jim for coming all the way from Queensland to spend the day in Western Australia listening and talking to Western Australians about our economy and about what we need to do to keep WA on top, because we know when the WA economy does well, the whole nation does well. Now, the reason that we put this event on is some of you would have come to an event we had earlier in the year with Anthony Albanese when he was Shadow Infrastructure Minister. 3 months after that event, Anthony became leader of the Labor Party. So I've had people knocking on the door saying, Patrick, I want you to host for me one of those sundowners. But more importantly, we wanted to have an event where we bring together that broad section of the community to have a chat, throw your ideas to Jim directly, to me, make sure that we hear from that broad range of people and make sure that we keep that conversation going, because we know that only by having these sort of events and these sort of conversations can you really make sure we've got a fully informed debate in Canberra and a fully informed debate in the national policy conversation. If you think about where Western Australia is at the moment, we have 14% youth unemployment. We've got one of the highest adult unemployment rates in the country. Things, as we all know instinctively from our day-to-day experiences, aren't going as well as they should for a state that has so much skill, so much capacity, so many people who would like to contribute to that next wave of economic growth. So clearly we need more ideas and we need new ideas. And here in Perth, in the electorate of Perth, there's some 25,000 businesses in Perth of all shapes and sizes. Peter Kennedy's probably going to tell me I've got the numbers wrong. I think it's sourced from your publication. But 15,000 of those businesses in the Perth electorate are very small businesses with turnover of less than $200,000 a year. So when the economy is kind of just not quite firing on all cylinders, they're the ones that really feel it. I know we've got representatives who are in that sort of starting businesses or in small business or in small community organisations who really feel that crunch long before many of the bigger name businesses in our community do. So it's important that we actually have the conversation about what we do next. And what Australia does next and what else we do is this part of the debate that Jim's been leading. If you look at the national economic debate, it's hard to find any serious economic commentary that doesn't take into account the ideas and the kind of arguments that Jim's been putting forward. Making more incentives for small businesses to invest in productive capital infrastructure. Making sure that we bring forward infrastructure spend so that you have more of what we know the government can do well, which is provide jobs through infrastructure investment and keep the economy going and keep those skilled workers in the workforce. And if you think about, things aren't great for the next... there's a lot of worrying signs, I'll say, over the next 12 to 24 months. If you think about the sort of war cabinet that you'd have in wartime, if you think about an economic war cabinet, if you were to take a look across the parliament, the sort of people you'd want, one of the people you would want in that economic war cabinet, regardless of your political affiliation, is Jim Chalmers. He is someone who was there during the global financial crisis. Many of us would have walked across it, driven over it, driven past it. The Perth City Link, a great piece of infrastructure, built because of the sorts of projects that came across Jim's desk, ticked off to make sure that we kept West Australians in work and make sure that you had something lasting. So it's not just something that makes you feel good, it's actually something that really transforms the city. That's the sort of stuff that gives me great faith that one day Jim will be a fantastic treasurer of this country. And again, I say that I think regardless of your political affiliation, Jim would make a fabulous treasurer of this country. It's why I wanted to bring you all here to have a chat to him. He's very generously said he'll take some questions at the end, so start thinking, don't think too hard, don't make it too difficult. But it is my absolute honour to introduce the Shadow Treasurer, Jim Chalmers.
Patrick's left me on my own here now, so that's a bit troubling. It feels a little bit like karaoke too, so if, while you're thinking about questions, you might want to think about requests too. I only do Mr. Brightside by the Killers, but anyway, so you have to request that. Can I acknowledge the traditional owners as well? Can I thank Patrick for the invitation to be here with you? Can I acknowledge all of you, but especially the owner of Patrick's favourite pub, but all of you, from all of the organisations that you represent, local supporters of Patrick, people who run peak organisations, business people, company directors, all of you, thank you so much for making the time for us to have a conversation over a drink this afternoon. We are really, really grateful for that. I'm here for a range of reasons, partly because I go where Patrick tells me, but also because what we're determined to be in the federal opposition under Anthony's leadership is the type of shadow cabinet which doesn't just spend all of its time in the boardrooms of Sydney and Melbourne, but actually takes the time and makes the time and genuinely listens to business and community organisation and real people in real communities right around Australia, in every corner of Australia. And that's why Anthony's been here countless times already since the election. I think this is my third visit and I'm back in October. And you'll find really right across the board, all of Patrick and my colleagues will be in Perth a lot because we do genuinely want to understand what's going on, in my case in the local economy, but in the broader community as well, because you can't get a sense of Perth or of Western Australia from the other side of the country. I think that's self-evident. And one of the reasons why I'm so soft on WA, I think, is because I'm a Queenslander, and I think frequently, whether you're from Queensland or whether you're from Western Australia, people misunderstand us because they don't take the time to understand. They don't understand that our economies are a little bit more diverse than the rest of the country gives us credit for. They don't understand the specific pressures in our economies and in our communities, and you can only really get a sense of that by spending time with each other. So I'm soft on WA for that reason. I like spending time here. There is something about Queenslanders and West Australians, I think, where we have at least that in common, but certainly more as well. I'm also soft on WA because I spent some time working for Kim Beazley, one of West Australia's favourite sons, now Governor Beazley, of course. And, you know, one of the things I really learned working with Kim back in 2006, I learned a lot from Kim, but one of the things I learned was that trip east to west and west to east, which a number of us have already spoken about tonight, which is a long trip. We did it this morning with my colleagues, Claudia and Megan, who are here as well. And there's something about being over Australia for that long which forces you to think about bigger issues. There's something about seeing the country from that perspective where you do elevate your thinking about the economy, about foreign policy, about Australia's place in the world. It's one of the wonderful things about coming to Perth. You do get that time and space to properly reflect and properly think. And so when we did spend some time this afternoon, as we did at University of Western Australia at the Public Policy Institute there, and we're talking foreign policy, we're talking economic policy, we're talking from the perspective of the Indian Ocean facing part of the country, you do have that opportunity to reflect deeply. And I think one of the things I was thinking about on the way here, knowing that I'd be spending some time with you this evening, is that there are a lot of serious issues playing out right now in the world, and we all follow what's going on in the US. We all follow what's going on between China and Hong Kong. We all follow what's going on between China and the US, Brexit, what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, what's happening to Saudi oil infrastructure. There's some big serious things going on right now. One of the reasons why, and I'm grateful that some of you have mentioned this in one way or another tonight already, one of the reasons why the team that Patrick and I are part of, we're not mucking around here, we're quickly back onto the front foot after we were defeated in May. One of the reasons for that is because we've got these big serious issues that we need to make a proper contribution to. We need to contribute our minds, we need to consult with you, we need to have play a meaningful role in some of these big debates about the big foreign policy and economic issues which are playing out. Now, clearly for a country like ours, these issues have an impact on us. But we've got some things going in our favour as well. And whether it's the fact that the iron ore price has been higher than we expected for some time because of what happened in Brazil, they've got that going for us. For those of you who work in tourism, obviously you'd prefer the dollar at 67 or 68 cents as it is now than you would at 88 cents or $1.10 where it was when I worked for the Treasurer. So that's going in our favour. You've also got a good state government, a really good state government. And it's no knock from my point of view on Anastasia in my home state or Dan in Victoria to say that I think Mark and Ben, they're running the sort of government that I would like to be part of. So you've got some things going in your favour as well. At the same time, as Patrick rightly identified, we've got some homegrown challenges right around Australia, and there are different emphases in different parts of Australia, but clearly we've got an issue with economic growth. The economy nationally is growing at its lowest pace that it has for the decade since the global financial crisis. We do have stagnant wages, that's feeding weak consumption. We've got record household debt, living standards have gone backwards, productivity's gone backwards. All of these factors, and I won't run off heaps and heaps of numbers, but just to give you a sense that there are a lot of challenges in the domestic economy as well, quite apart from what we're seeing in the global economy. And so what we want to do, and Patrick's been in my ear a lot, particularly about the small business part of this, how do we help small businesses? Because you walk down any main street of any capital city in Australia, we all see the for lease signs. We all see maybe the shop assistant, not in the shop on their own from time, frequently. We all see anecdotally that some of the issues around retail and consumption of that are biting hard in our communities. And so Patrick's been in my ear about what we could responsibly and affordably do to try and give small businesses in particular a bit more relief, and we'll keep having that conversation. I've proposed a few things that the government should be thinking about, bringing forward some of their tax cuts so people have got more money to spend in your businesses. We could do something about New Start, and that would be spent in the economy. We could bring forward some infrastructure spending, as Patrick said. We could have a tax incentive for all of you that invest in equipment and capital, something like accelerated depreciation. We need an energy policy, clearly. And when I say we need an energy policy, I don't mean 16 versions of an energy policy, which is what we've had for the last 6 years. We need a proper energy policy to get your energy costs down. All of those things we need to be doing. And so instead of going into those in any detail, really just to give you a sense, and I'll finish up here, that we are taking the issues that you face in the economy here and in the community here very seriously enough to want to engage with you, not just tonight, but frequently on an ongoing basis. And we take it seriously enough as well, not just to be the kind of typical opposition that only ever points out where the other mob are getting things wrong, but to also suggest where they might get things right. And some of those ideas that Patrick and I have already run through, they fall into that category. Things that the government could pick up and run with, which we've suggested, and if they do that, we'll support them. And we'll suggest what else they might do as well on your behalf and on the country's behalf too. So with those few words, I am happy to take some questions, but really just to thank you again for supporting Patrick in the way that you do. He is part of a really quite remarkable Western Australian contingent in Canberra now. You're all aware that you had a whole bunch of really senior people who finished up at roughly the same time, and the people that replaced them are going to be cabinet ministers in federal Labor governments for the foreseeable future. Patrick and Matt and Mads and Anne, senators, we've got some really good people out of the West who are doing you proud, but also being the best kind of representatives like Patrick, which is they go to Canberra to represent your interests rather than come here to represent Canberra's interests. And that's as good a summary as I can think of when it comes to Patrick and his contribution. So thank you for supporting him, and thank you for being here tonight, and I'm happy to take a couple of questions if you like. Thank you.
Start with Tim.
Do you want the microphone, Tim?
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, I get co-billing. Tim Diamond. I work for Unions WA, the peak union body, and something that we're particularly concerned about that's probably going to be coming up in the next Parliament is some of the issues around the free trade agreements that are going to be sort of served up. I think it's Indonesian, the Peruvian one. The coalition government appears to be committed to basically including investor-state dispute settlement procedures in them, as well as various arrangements around work visas, sort of removal of labour market testing for particular types of overseas workers and all of that sort of thing. It's fair to say the union movement and various civil society groups are not happy with free trade agreements, including those sorts of things. And notwithstanding the fact that Labor sort of wants to commit to a free trade regime overall, I'd just like to sort of get a sense from you about what's going to be happening with those agreements or the enabling legislation when they come up for Parliament, because as it stands at the moment, Labor policy is to oppose ISDS and oppose labour market testing. No labour market testing.
Yeah, got it. Thanks very much for that, Tim. I think the best way to summarise our position on the Indonesian FTA is that we take it through the long process of the Joint Standing Committee on Treaties, which is actually there's a handful of effective parliamentary committees, and that's one of them. It does actually get to the bottom of some of these issues. So typically our position is we let that play its course, and then we have a long caucus process that involves all of us and then the shadow cabinet. My personal view is before we say yes in entirety or no in entirety, we look for ways that we can improve these agreements. And labour market testing is a concern that I share about that agreement, but about some of the other agreements that have been signed in the course of the last 6 and a bit years. In some cases, we have been able to improve agreements. We improved, Penny Wong and I worked together closely on improving the China agreement on labour market testing. And at the start of that process, people said to us, there's no way the government's going to shift course, and we were able to make them shift course. Not as much as we would like, but I'm of the school that says you get what you can. You try and make the best of these situations. So we don't have a position yet. As you probably know, Madeline is working her way through these issues, so is Penny, so are other colleagues. That is, let's be honest with it, not always a smooth ride for everyone involved. But it's a good process because at the end of the day we can get to working out what can we do better on labour market testing, what can we do better on ISDS, which we don't love as a party, how can we address some of these issues so that people are satisfied. The other thing very quickly before I take another question is, and this, I have an interest in trade policy, I've had an interest in trade for a long time. One of the big problems we've got is a sort of an instinctive view about a trade agreement being bad or good. Right? And my view is it's the content that matters and then the devil's in the detail. But one of the things we could do, which Jason Clare, who used to be our Shadow Trade Minister, I thought did some excellent work on, was how come we never get a sense of the costs and benefits of these agreements before they're signed? Right? We don't do the Productivity Commission or whoever, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Treasury, anyone could do it. For us to make a decision in our caucus room, it would be good to know who wins, who loses, and what's the magnitude of those wins and losses. We don't actually know that when we sign it, so we're effectively making an ideological decision. And so we should model it then, and we also should check 10 years later whether the benefits that were promised in a trade agreement actually eventuated. And one of the reasons why that's important is because one of the big concerns, and we spoke about this at UWA this afternoon, and I've spoken with many business organisations over the years on this, it's a passion of mine. When we sign these things, how do we actually get the jobs for people out of them? How do we make sure that businesses can actually access the benefits of these things? And one of the downsides of never checking whether we got the benefits that we were hoping for is that we don't actually know, except for some limited surveying by Austrade, we don't actually know whether businesses of medium-sized businesses in Perth and Brisbane and around the country actually have the skills and the knowledge to build these markets which matter for local jobs.
Then Peter, then Sandra. No?
My question is about tax reform. Australia is in dire need of tax reform. As a 68-year-old retired person, I have all sorts of benefits. I see my children not enjoying those same benefits. I'm in such a privileged position. The agenda that Bill took to the last election, negative gearing, capital gains, franking, they are all right. They are not wrong, they are right. How can we have that as our policy but not lose votes? I have very good friends who would not vote Labor because they're going to lose 3,000 or 5,000 or 7,000 of their privilege. We are not entitled to those privileges. How is it that we can sell that to the Australian public?
Thanks, Sid. Can we go back to talking about trade? Sid, I hear, and the truth is, I've had, I don't know, definitely hundreds, maybe thousands of conversations about tax since the election in May, and Patrick would have been in the same cart. And I'm doing a heap of consultation on the tax policies that we talked to the last election. You're right to recognise that we couldn't build a big enough constituency behind them. Self-evidently, we're on the wrong side of the parliament. And in my view, when that happens, and people send you a message on election day as they did, our responsibility and our obligation is to learn from that. But also not to learn the wrong lessons from it. There are people around Australia who would like us to have an identical policy position at the next election as the last one. There are a lot of people who would like us to entirely wipe the slate clean and start again.
And they're all under 40.
I guess my view is there's no election, with the passage of 3 years, there's not typically an election where a party takes an identical set of policies. And my obligation to you and to everyone is to think about the challenges that you rightly identified. The tax system is not fair. The budget is not in good enough nick. There are issues around intergenerational equity. We do need to deal with those issues. But my job is to come up with the best possible way to deal with that. And that might be different to what we took to the last election. And so I think inevitably, if not obviously, the policy agenda won't be identical in 2022 in every conceivable way than it was in 2019. We've got to resist the urge to fight the last campaign again. There are arguments for what we put forward. We weren't successful. We've got some thinking and some reflection to do, and that's what we're doing. And one of the things I'm grateful for, there's a lot of things I'm grateful for with Anthony's leadership, and I think he has made a terrific start. But one of the bits of guidance and leadership which the Canberra commentators don't love, but which I think is spot on, is Anthony has said to all of us, we're not in a rush here. You know, let's properly learn the lessons of the election, let's take our time, let's make sure the policies we take to the next election are calibrated to the times. Nobody expects us to have a final policy agenda 4 months from the last election, with almost 3 years to go to the next election. And so that's the process I'm engaged in.